Alright, today I'm going to be showing you guys one of my redstone contraptions that I built a little bit ago. It is a one-wide tileable postal office. What that means is that you can input a minecart chest with any number paper on it, 1 to basically infinity with certain constraints. Okay, I want to make it clear here that it's not just any number 1 to 10 or 1 to infinity. It's whatever you place in these item filters. So you could have redstone dust as one of your inputs. You could have grass as one of your inputs. It doesn't matter. I'm just using numbers here for simplicity. It will send it off, put it through the system, and it will sort it down here, and then finally it will arrive at your output, number 8. The reason why I made this is because I saw a lot of videos on the internet showing these postal offices, but all of them were too wide tileable, which means every other space here was an air gap, and I decided to improve on that by making it so that every slice has an output. Okay, I want to make it clear that just because this is one wide tileable does not make it better than any two wide tileable setups. It is much bigger, probably uses a lot more resources, probably a lot more laggy, a lot of things like that. The only reason I wanted to make this one wide tileable was as a challenge to myself, something interesting, new to build. I think the final result was quite good, but there is a lot of space that could be saved that isn't. So there's definitely places to improve, and it's probably not as good as a two wide tileable setup if all you care about is having a postal office. This was kind of just a redstone challenge for me. The way this works basically is over here there's a minecart separator. So no matter how many minecarts you put in per minute, it will only output one every set amount of time, which we'll talk about more about that later. Then it passes over these item filters. You have to have, if you want the minecarts to be sorted, you have to put an item in that corresponds to one of these. So, for example, if you put, let's say, number 11 in here, and there's only number 10 to 1, it will just come out the output here and be thrown out the garbage, basically. Once it passes through here, it gets sent down into this system. This system was not designed by me. I'll put the name up of the person who built it on screen if I find it. Once it passes through this system, it then comes back up through here. These are waterlogged mangrove roots, which means that the minecarts, it acts kind of like an elevator and brings them all the way to the output, passing it by the hopper so that it returns the filter item back to it. The reason why I decided to implement this elevator here is because the input and outputs are all on the same Y level, which means that it's very easy to put a building around it and shove all of this underground so nobody has to see it. Okay, that's kind of the overview. Now we're going to go in depth on what each part of this system does. So first we've got the minecart separator. I'm going to grab a minecart and just show you guys what happened when it enters. So first of all, it goes in, gets detected by the rail, pushed up by this piston, and then pushed over by that piston, and then it goes on its way. Now, why this is important is because if I have, let's say, a lot of minecarts in there, it will only output one minecart at a time. And this is a mechanic that we can use to create this separator. So what happens is, once the minecart arrives here, it steps on this detector rail, which unlocks this hopper clock over here, which means that this redstone block will now move over to this side. That will fire this observer into this block, which then starts this very well-timed sequence where this piston is fired, and then shortly after, this piston is fired by a 2 game tick delay. What happens here is it pushes this piston down with this observer, which gives a 2 game tick pulse to this block, which fires another well-timed circuit where this piston is extended 2 game ticks before this piston, which powers this one. So this pushes up the minecart, and then this pushes the minecart sideways. The scaffolding is important because the hitbox of the minecart kind of goes diagonally here and snaps to this rail, so without the scaffolding it wouldn't work properly. So that's this minecart separator. Then it goes through this tiny little waterlogged mangrove roots elevator. I use these a lot. If you want to build your own, just make sure the important thing is that the momentum coming into the structure is low, otherwise it'll fly out this way and it won't actually be pulled up. The way this mechanic works, I didn't find it. I'll put up the name of whoever discovered it on screen. Basically, it gets pulled sideways this way, then that way, then that way, then that way by the water in the blocks, and then kind of ejected out this way. Then we come across the item filters. These are normal, just impulse item filters. You put an item in, and they go out, and if it matches, it'll go out through this input. So I could put a composter here, and it wouldn't pick it up. But if I put the desired item, then it will go into the output. So what I've done here is at the torch that unlocks this hopper to let one item through, I've attached an observer. So basically, if you input the correct item in the slice, this observer will fire. And what it does is it starts this pulse extender. This is the output. The output is driven by this comparator. So it will basically move the item into here. And what that will do is it will lock this hopper and start draining items from this hopper into this hopper. Once there are no items inside, that will allow this hopper to be unlocked because there are no longer any items in here, which will force the item back into the dropper, which will lock this hopper again, which means that the items will go back into this one. What that means is that this will go onto an on state, and then it will turn off back in an off state once this is empty again. And what I've done is I've attached this to an observer, so it'll pulse it once when this comparator turns on, then pulse it again when it turns off. And then this drives the minecart separating system. So if I just activate this slice, what happens is that these redstone blocks get pulled out of the way, all 3 of them, see, and then only this slice in the middle here gets the trapdoor pushed into place. And what that means is that a minecart will go here and then fall down into the right slice. And then once the pulse extension is over, it will slide everything back into place. What happens is it pulses these rails, and what it does is it pulses one of the observers, but because of quasi-connectivity, 3 pistons here will go down. So if I slow down the game, do that, you can see all 3 pistons retracted, extended, I guess. And then that pulls all of these out of the way, and then only this piston will fire, because the observer is directly firing the piston, which means that quasi-connectivity does not happen. Quasi-connectivity is a whole other thing I'm not trying to explain in this video. Okay, so that's the basics. That's everything. That's how it works. Okay, so the way you want to use this system is, firstly, you'll want to grab the litematic that I've provided and either build it in survival or paste it into your world using creative, up to you. You'll basically want your inputs here and then your outputs here. So you could have this rail line come in from everyone's houses or buildings, or however you want to do it. They all kind of combine into this one hole. However you want to do that, that's up to you. And then they'll exit out here. Pretty straightforward. The way you want to tile it, so let's say you want 100 slices. You want to chop off these end bits. So you want to grab just this one row, expand it, make sure that you place enough redstone blocks up here for the rails, and then you will want to add this section at the back. What this does is it basically just moves the minecart from the item filter to the output. Now, the reason why it's not technically infinitely expandable is because this item clock can only go for a certain amount of time. So the more you expand it, the longer it'll take for one minecart to go through the system. And the reason why that is because if you have one minecart and let's say it has to go to slot number 1, and then you put in another minecart that has to go to slot number 10, then it works fine. The first minecart goes, it comes out here, and then the second minecart comes and it goes out number 10. But if the timings aren't right and you place in a minecart with number 10 in first and then a minecart with an item for slot 1, what will happen is the minecart for number 10 will go and it'll open this slice, right? And then it will continue on its way. But then minecart number 1 will come over here and open this slice. So then cart number 10 will drop down here and go into slot number 1 if the timings aren't right. So if you want to expand this further, what you have to do is you have to go down here and adjust this clock. You want the same number of blocks in here as the clock over here. And you'll just have to do some trial and error to find out how many or how many less blocks you have to put in these item hoppers, depending on how long you make it. So the longer it is, the more items you have to put in those hoppers, and therefore the longer it takes for a single minecart to be sorted. So the reason you can't expand it infinitely is because if you reach the limit on here and the timer still isn't great enough, then you can run into some issues where minecarts get sorted improperly because of the time limit of these pulse extenders. So, you know, I could redesign this to have a larger pulse extender, but there is no such thing as a pulse extender that you can configure to infinite amount of times without that pulse extender taking up infinite space. So this was the best case scenario because honestly, I don't think there's ever a case where some contraption like this would be used with 5 full stacks of items in this hopper, which would basically make the machine ridiculously slow and impractical. So, you know, this is meant for smaller scales. 8 items, still 8 items in these item hoppers, still pretty fast, but like, if I extended this all the way to the mountain over there, first of all, that would be a ridiculous amount of places that the minecarts could go, but I don't see it being reasonable. Diamond block here is just to indicate what the input is. Really, I don't think there's anything else to note. I think that's about it. Hopefully you guys enjoy this build, and I'll be sure to leave a litematic, and I will make any last second changes to it on the litematic as well. Alright, that's everything for this video. Hopefully I'll be back soon with another few redstone builds. Got quite a few saved up in my redstone testing worlds that I'd like to show off. Alright, that's it. See ya.